12-year-old Eli Davis pushed open the creaky wooden hatch and poked his head through the square opening in the ceiling. Dust floated in the shaft of sunlight like tiny ghosts, dancing above boxes stacked high with decades of memories. His sneakers thudded softly against the wooden floorboards as he stepped up into the attic, flashlight in one hand and a crumpled grocery list in the other. "Grandpa, where's the Christmas stuff again?" he called down. "Back corner, under the green tarp," came the raspy voice from below. "Mind the mouse traps." Eli wrinkled his nose and tiptoed through the maze of boxes, carefully avoiding anything that looked remotely chewable. He wasn't particularly fond of this old house. Grandpa's place in upstate New York was quiet, drafty, and way too full of weird smells. But his parents had dropped him off for the weekend while they attended a work conference. He didn't mind. Not really. Grandpa Harold was kind in his own gruff way, always giving Eli a firm pat on the back instead of a hug, always calling him champ, with a faint, faraway smile. But the man barely spoke unless he had to. Eli had never heard him tell a story. Not one. As he yanked away the green tarp, a stack of dusty plastic bins came into view. One by one, Eli started pulling them out, grumbling at the weight. After moving 2 tubs labeled XMAS Lights and Orange 9507, he spotted something odd behind them. A small, weathered wooden box, its edges chipped and worn smooth with age. It was wedged awkwardly between a beam and a stack of books. Curiosity lit up his eyes. He tugged the box free and blew off the dust, revealing faded initials carved on the top. HD. He looked over his shoulder, then slowly unlatched the brass clasp and opened it. Inside lay a folded American flag, yellowed with time. Next to it, a deep blue velvet case. Eli opened it carefully and froze. A shimmering 5-pointed star gleamed up at him, hanging from a light blue ribbon with white stars embroidered across it. The edges were delicate, the gold sharp and brilliant. The front read, "Medal of Honor." Eli's breath caught in his throat. He'd seen videos about this medal in school. His teacher said it was the highest military award in the country, given only for extraordinary acts of bravery. People in textbooks got this. People in war movies. Presidents gave it out. Not grandpas who delivered mail and watched baseball every evening. Beneath the medal was a folded, brittle envelope. Eli opened it and gently pulled out a photograph. It was black and white, showing a young soldier, maybe 19 or 20, grinning into the camera with a rifle slung over his shoulder. His uniform had the same last name, Davis. "Whoa," Eli whispered. The sound of footsteps thudded from downstairs. "Find it?" Grandpa Harold called up. Yeah, almost," Eli yelled back, slipping the photo into his hoodie pocket and gently closing the metal box. He didn't take the whole thing, just snapped a quick photo with his phone. Then he put everything back exactly as he'd found it. Almost. Later that evening, while his grandpa dozed off in front of the muted TV, Eli sat on the living room rug with his Chromebook, uploading the photo to his school's blog page. The Veterans Day project was due Monday, and while everyone else was posting pictures of uncles and great-grandfathers in uniforms, Eli had something different. His caption was short, simple. "This is my grandpa's. I think he's a hero, but he never talks about it." He stared at the screen for a few seconds before hitting post. Then he shut the laptop and looked across the room. Grandpa Harold was still in his recliner, head tilted slightly, his eyes closed. The TV flickered across his wrinkled face, casting light on someone who had spent decades hiding in plain sight. Eli didn't know it yet, but that one small post was about to change everything, not just for his grandfather, but for their entire town. And eventually, the country. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe. More real, powerful moments like this await you every day. The next morning began like any other. Grandpa Harold was already up before the sun, dressed in his usual flannel shirt and faded jeans, sipping black coffee at the kitchen table like he had every morning for decades. Eli came down the stairs in his hoodie and socks, yawning and rubbing his eyes. "Sleep all right?" Grandpa asked without looking up from the newspaper. "Yeah," Eli mumbled, grabbing a bowl and pouring himself some cereal. Silence filled the kitchen, comfortable but quiet. The kind that's been practiced over time, but Eli kept glancing at his grandpa between spoonfuls of cereal. The image of the Medal of Honor burned into his memory. He couldn't stop thinking about it. All those years he'd spent thinking Grandpa was just a quiet old man who delivered mail and liked the Yankees. How could he have a medal like that and never say a word? "Hey, Grandpa," Eli began, pretending to be casual. "Can I ask you something?" Harold folded his newspaper slowly and looked at the boy with calm, tired eyes. "Sure. I found this medal yesterday. In the attic. In that old box with the flag and stuff." A long pause. Grandpa Harold leaned back in his chair, hands folded, expression unreadable. He didn't speak right away. His eyes drifted toward the kitchen window, staring into a space far beyond the backyard. "Where'd you see it?" he asked softly. "In the velvet box," Eli said. "It said Medal of Honor. I looked it up. That's like the highest award, right?" Harold nodded slowly, still looking out the window. "I didn't mean to snoop," Eli added quickly. "I was just helping with the decorations, and I found it behind some stuff." Harold finally turned back to him, voice low. "It was a long time ago, Eli." "But why don't you ever talk about it?" the boy asked. "It's like a really big deal." The old man sighed, rubbing his weathered hands together. "Because some things don't need to be talked about." "But you saved people, didn't you? That's what it's for, right?" "Hero stuff?" Harold's eyes dropped to the table. For a moment, he looked older than ever, like the weight of his silence had finally caught up with him. "I was 19, he said quietly. "Korean War. Everything happened so fast, I didn't even realize what I'd done until it was over. They said I was brave, but brave isn't what it felt like at the time. It felt like surviving." Eli didn't know what to say. He just listened. "They pinned that medal on me after I got home," Harold continued. "Big ceremony. Press, flashbulbs, generals saluting. I shook hands with the Secretary of Defense, but the men I lost, the friends I couldn't bring back, they never got medals, just flags on caskets." His voice cracked, just slightly. "That's why I put it away. The medal's not for me. It's for them." Eli felt a lump form in his throat. He'd never seen this side of his grandfather. The man who barely showed emotion now sat across from him, eyes misty, voice raw with memory. "I didn't mean to dig it up," Eli said gently. "I just thought it was amazing." Harold managed a faint smile. "You're a good kid, Eli, but some things are better left where they belong." Eli hesitated, unsure whether to mention the blog post. Then his phone buzzed. He pulled it from his hoodie pocket and glanced at the screen. Notifications were flooding in. "Cool story. Is this real? Your grandpa's a legend. This is going viral." His heart skipped a beat. Before he could say anything, the kitchen landline rang. Harold picked it up. "Hello?" He listened quietly, eyebrows knitting together. "Yes, I'm Harold Davis." Pause. "Who?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm sorry, sir, but how did you—" "No, I haven't spoken to anyone from the military in years." Eli watched his grandfather's face change, something between confusion and alarm. When he hung up, he stared at the receiver for a long moment before slowly placing it back. "Who was it?" Eli asked. "Someone from Washington," Harold said slowly. "They said they'd like to verify something about my service." Eli's eyes widened. It had begun. By Monday morning, the small post on Eli's school blog had exploded far beyond his imagination. What had started as a simple Veterans Day tribute was now being shared by teachers, parents, local veterans groups, and even a regional news station that picked it up for a hometown hero spotlight. By the end of the day, Eli's inbox had hundreds of messages, and for the first time in school history, the principal interrupted fourth period with an announcement not about lunch or weather, but about a student's grandfather. "Let's take a moment to recognize Mr. Harold Davis," the voice crackled over the intercom. "A Medal of Honor recipient who served in the Korean War and lives right here in our community." Eli shrank in his seat as his classmates turned to him in shock. "Dude, your grandpa's famous. Why didn't you say anything? You're like a war hero's grandson." He didn't know what to say. He barely understood it himself. That afternoon, when he returned to Grandpa Harold's house, 3 people were already waiting outside. 2 men in navy suits with American flag pins and a woman with a notepad and a camera slung around her neck. "You must be Eli," the woman said warmly. "I'm Jenna with the local paper. Is Mr. Davis home?" Harold stood in the doorway, arms crossed, jaw tight. "I didn't agree to any interviews," he said firmly. "No, sir, of course," she replied gently, "but there's growing interest. People want to know more about your story. It could inspire others." He stared at her for a moment, then turned back inside without a word. Eli followed, heart pounding. Inside, Grandpa Harold sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone. It had rung 5 times in the last hour. Once from the Department of Veterans Affairs, once from a retired Army colonel, and once from a National Military Archive, trying to confirm a few records that hadn't been digitized. The attention was mounting, fast. Eli stood quietly in the doorway. "I'm sorry." "For what?" Harold said without looking at him. "I didn't mean for all this to happen. I didn't think anyone would care that much. I just wanted to say thank you in a cool way." Grandpa Harold looked up, his expression softening. "You didn't do anything wrong, kid," he said. "You reminded people that stories like mine didn't end when the shooting stopped." That night, Harold agreed, reluctantly, to speak with one reporter. Just one. She sat across from him on the living room couch, asking questions gently. Eli watched from the floor, hanging on to every word. For the first time in his life, he heard his grandfather describe what happened on a cold Korean hillside in 1951, how his unit was ambushed, how he led a dozen injured men down a ravine under fire, how he returned for the last 2 even after being shot in the leg. "I didn't feel brave at the time," Harold said, his voice cracking. "I felt scared. I still feel scared sometimes when I close my eyes." The story aired that weekend, and then everything changed. Calls poured in, not just from the state, but from national media. The Veterans Legacy Foundation reached out with an offer to formally honor him. A senator posted the clip and called Mr. Davis a quiet lion of American valor. The Korean War Veterans Association offered to fund a memorial plaque in his name, but the biggest surprise came the following Thursday. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. 2 Secret Service agents stepped out. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Children stared from driveways. Then, from the back seat, emerged a figure instantly recognizable. The President of the United States. Eli's jaw dropped. The president shook Harold's hand with both of his, speaking low and sincerely. "We've honored thousands of heroes, Mr. Davis, but men like you, men who carry the burden silently for decades, remind us what true humility looks like." A podium was set up on the lawn. Reporters gathered, cameras rolled, and Harold Davis, the man who had spent his life hiding the weight of his heroism, stood before his town, not for glory, but for truth. As he began to speak, his voice trembled. "I didn't do anything more than any soldier would have done for his brothers. I just got the honor of being the one who came home." Beside him stood Eli, chin up, chest out. His grandfather's quiet strength finally understood. The air was still as Harold Davis stepped up to the podium, his Medal of Honor pinned neatly over his old dress shirt, the same one he hadn't worn in years. The crowd that had gathered stretched across the front lawn and spilled onto the sidewalk. Neighbors, veterans, reporters, local schoolchildren, and even a marching band stood in respectful silence. Eli stood just to the side, his heart pounding with a mix of pride and awe. He watched as his grandfather, his quiet, no-nonsense grandpa who'd never even wanted a birthday party, took a deep breath and looked over the crowd. "I'm not used to this," Harold said, his voice gravelly but clear. "Truth is, I spent most of my life trying to forget what earned me this medal." He tapped the star lightly, as if it still felt foreign on his chest. "I was 19, scared out of my mind. My unit was ambushed in the middle of the night in a place most Americans couldn't find on a map. Men were screaming, some were praying, some were bleeding too badly to move. I don't remember thinking. I just remember running toward them." A murmur swept through the audience. Eli swallowed hard. "I carried 11 men off that hillside, went back for 2 more, took a bullet through the leg on the last trip down. They pinned this on me when I got home, but I never really felt like I deserved it." He paused, glancing at Eli, who was blinking rapidly, trying not to cry. "I never talked about it because every time I looked at this medal, I saw the faces of the guys who didn't come back. Guys who were better than me, funnier, braver, kinder. This medal felt like I'd borrowed something from their memory." The president, standing just behind him, bowed his head. "But recently, a 12-year-old boy reminded me that sometimes telling our stories doesn't glorify war, it honors peace. That remembering what we went through can help others understand the cost of freedom." Harold turned fully toward Eli now, his expression softening. "My grandson Eli found this medal buried in my attic, and instead of treating it like a trinket, he treated it like a legacy. That's what changed everything." The crowd applauded gently, with a few veterans placing their hands over their hearts. "I never expected this. I didn't ask for it." But I stand here today because of a boy who asked a question I'd been avoiding for 70 years. Why don't you ever talk about it?" Eli bit his lip, barely able to look up. "But maybe it's time I did," Harold said quietly. "Maybe the next generation needs to hear what we went through, not for medals, not for speeches, but so they remember what sacrifice really looks like." The band softly began playing "God Bless America" in the background. As the president stepped forward, he addressed the crowd with a voice full of reverence. "There are heroes we see," he said, "and then there are heroes we overlook because they're too humble to raise their hand. Mr. Davis is the kind of man who didn't seek attention or fame. He just did what was right, and then lived quietly with the memory." He turned toward Harold. "Sir, on behalf of a grateful nation, we thank you for your courage, your humility, and your service." He extended his hand, and Harold shook it firmly. Then something remarkable happened. The president stepped aside, motioning toward Eli. The young boy looked up, startled. Then slowly, encouraged by the president himself, he stepped up onto the makeshift stage. Harold bent down slightly, placing a hand on Eli's shoulder. The president smiled and said to the crowd, "It was this young man's love for his grandfather that reminded us all. Sometimes heroes don't wear capes or uniforms. Sometimes they wear old jackets and sit quietly in recliners, just waiting for someone to ask the right question." The crowd erupted in applause. Eli's face lit up with pride. For the first time in his life, he truly understood the weight of history, of legacy, of quiet bravery. His grandfather wasn't just a war hero. He was a man who had carried the burden of memory, silently, for decades. And now, that silence had finally been broken, not with noise, but with honor. As the music swelled and the flags waved, Harold leaned down and whispered in Eli's ear, "You gave them back my voice, kiddo. Thank you." The crowd eventually dispersed. The band packed up, reporters climbed back into their vans, and the black sedan with the presidential seal slowly pulled away from the curb. But Harold Davis just sat on the porch with Eli, side by side on the old wooden swing that had been there longer than Eli had been alive. Neither of them spoke at first. The evening breeze rustled through the trees, and a few autumn leaves fluttered to the ground like whispers from another time. Finally, Harold broke the silence. "Well, I reckon that's more excitement than I've had in the last 30 years combined." Eli smiled. "You did good, Grandpa." Harold nodded slowly. "Didn't think I'd ever talk about that part of my life again. Thought I'd leave it buried. But turns out you can only keep things locked away for so long before they start calling out to be heard." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the Medal of Honor once again. For decades, it had been hidden away in a dusty attic box, but now it gleamed proudly in his hand, catching the light of the setting sun. "I used to think this medal was a reminder of what I lost," Harold said. "But today, it felt like it finally stood for something else." "Like what?" Eli asked. "Hope," Harold replied, his voice quiet. "Not just for the men who never made it home, but for the people who still remember them. For kids like you." Eli looked at the medal, then at his grandfather. "I think they'd be proud of you." Harold's eyes welled for a moment, but he blinked it away with the skill of a man who had carried heavier weights for years. "You know," he said, "when I came home from Korea, there were parades, sure, but no one really wanted to hear the stories. They just wanted to clap and move on. Maybe that's why I stopped talking about it. But you listened." Eli felt his throat tighten. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "You asked." Harold replied gently. "You cared enough to ask. That's more than most ever did." They sat there a little longer, watching the horizon fade from orange to indigo. After a while, Eli stood up. "You think you'll ever tell the whole story?" he asked. Harold looked off into the distance. "Maybe. But not just to a reporter, maybe to a class, or a group of young kids who think history's just something in a textbook. Maybe I'll tell it so they know that bravery doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it walks quiet, limps a little, and doesn't like to talk." Eli nodded. Then he smiled. "Maybe you could start with my class." Harold raised an eyebrow. "You sure they'd want to hear from an old man?" "They'd hang on to every word," Eli said confidently. "You're a legend now, remember?" Harold chuckled, a deep and honest sound. "Well, I suppose it's time I start acting like it, huh?" As Eli headed back inside, Harold lingered on the porch for a moment, medal still in hand. He looked up at the stars just beginning to appear in the fading sky and whispered softly, I carried you all with me, every step, every day. Today, the world finally saw you too." And with that, he stood up, walked inside, and for the first time in 70 years, left the attic door wide open.